Hello, everyone, and welcome to our session. We're very excited to be speaking to you today. Our topic we'd like to talk about is spirituality and recreational therapy practice, helping people create meaning, joy, and awareness. I'm Lynn Anderson, and I'm with Cathy O'Keefe today. We did just want to let you know that the session is 90 minutes long. So if you watch the entire session, it will be worth 0.15 CEUs, continuing education units, for those of you that are interested in earning CEUs.
Okay, as we complete the session, we hope that you'll be able to define the spiritual domain of human functioning. And of course, we're going to talk about what it means to function, to list at least 3 ways that spirituality builds well-being and human flourishing. And gee, you're with the right person in Lynn talking about flourishing, human flourishing. And we're going to list at least 5 interventions and approaches to build spiritual well-being from an ecological perspective. And of course, that's really important because our clients exist in communities and environments that impact the way that they see life. Okay, so I'm going to start. I entered the field of therapeutic rec way back in 1971 before I even knew what it was. I had an undergraduate degree in art, and I was interested in expressive arts. I'm also a musician. And so I did my senior internship at a psychiatric hospital unit for the criminally insane, and then began to work in psychiatry in an inpatient unit right out of college. I really was mostly self-taught when I went back and found the field. The field was actually found for me by a person that I knew who came and recruited me for giving lectures and talks in her class. And then I went into the master's program in therapeutic recreation there at that university. In those days, we didn't even have textbooks much. We were just getting our handouts together. We were forming the field as we went along, and gave me a chance to get to know the people who drove the engine that created the field. The early pioneers and the people who came in the next 25 or 30 years were really essential as colleagues. I always saw the intrinsic connection between leisure recreation and therapeutic rec and spirituality. I really felt that philosophical psychology was a piece of it too. And I already was very attracted to the transformative possibilities of leisure and spirituality, and so it was a great fit for me. But my interest in spirituality, especially because it related to suffering, didn't seem to be grabbing on with many of my colleagues. So one year I did a session in New Orleans at a NTRS conference, and I thought I was going to have nobody in the audience, about 20 people, because I was going against one of these CEU sessions where you had to go to all 3 and the benefits were endless. And so I just thought, well, this will be a nice chance to have a little talk with a few people, and this will be really great. And so I sat waiting for the talk to begin, and people started coming in the room and coming in the room and coming in the room. The next thing I knew was almost 200 people, and they were out in the hallway and they were sitting on the floors, and I was blown over. But that told me that this issue of spirituality and suffering and the need that we have to see more deeply into our clients wasn't something that I was just seeing. And then starting back in 1971, I began a journey of accompanying people who were dying, mostly friends and family members, but I saw that transformative power of suffering, and that was just huge. And so I knew that was important for us to address. And I knew a lot of my colleagues wanted to address it, but the milieu at that time was very, very behavioral, very physically functioning oriented, and people weren't that willing to talk about it. Then in 1976, I heard the words of a neonatal intensive care physician about my baby. I won't be able to save your baby. He's going to die in the first 72 hours from underdeveloped lungs. I was alone in the hospital. In those days, the husbands were only allowed in very briefly for the delivery, and then they had to leave. And so I felt a tremendous awareness of what it means to be alone and suffering. And I was catapulted, I think, really into that experience for other people. oddly and unexpectedly, my baby survived. So I used that feeling that I had to try to reach out, and I became very active in Compassionate Friends and a whole lot of other things. So I'm here today to share some of what I've learned about spirituality and suffering and human flourishing, and the wonderful connection in these essential life experiences with the work that we do in therapeutic rec therapy, whatever term you like to use. And if in the end any of you are interested in Zooming, we'd like to give you a chance to let us know, and maybe we can create a Zoom meeting. And that way we can converse with you, not just give you a canned talk, but converse with you and hear your experiences and ideas. So that's what I'm looking forward to. Thanks, Lynn.
Yeah, thank you, Cathy. And I think your contributions to the field over the years has been significant. And I'm just really honored to present with you today on this topic, and that I think we both care deeply about. And I'm also so moved by your journey. And I think my journey is similar to yours, but different. I think it's something maybe we could talk about at the end, the idea of spirituality and suffering, and then the idea of spirituality and joy, and how maybe when we're suffering, we need that joyous aspect of spirituality even more. And I feel like my path kind of came more through a path of joyousness. So like you, I'd never heard of the field of therapeutic recreation, and I was pursuing my undergraduate degree in fisheries and wildlife biology, of all things, and French, just for fun. And as I was a college student, I started working as a canoe guide in the Boundary Waters Wilderness area in northern Minnesota. And I learned there firsthand the way that recreation and wilderness help people to learn and grow and heal. The power of nature, the transcendence of the wilderness experience, the positive interdependence of our small group as we traveled in the wilderness. I saw the positive impacts that had on people, and especially on their spiritual well-being. And I decided that that's what I wanted to explore more, this idea of how we can bring these nature and leisure experiences to people. And I wanted to find a way to make it my life work. And that's when I learned about therapy recreation, because it is a field that uses the leisure experience, which in its essence is a deeply spiritual experience, and uses nature experiences to help people achieve well-being. So I went on from my undergraduate work to get my graduate degrees in outdoor recreation and therapeutic recreation, and have continued to explore how spirituality is integral to our practice in recreational therapy today. I feel like our work is a natural fit to spiritual fulfillment because we help people find meaning and purpose and joy in their everyday lives. And so today, Cathy and I want to share our combined perspectives on the role that we can play as recreational therapists to help people achieve some level of spiritual well-being. So we're going to talk about what spirituality is, its relationship to well-being and leisure, and then ways, even very practical ways, that we as recreational therapists can include spirituality in our practice. So we're going to start off very basic. We're going to start with, what do we mean by spirituality? So I'm going to give a very basic overview of spirituality, and then we'll dive deeper, and Cathy will take us on that deeper dive. So let's just start off with a very basic definition from the dictionary. Spirituality is the quality of being concerned with the human spirit or soul, as opposed to material or physical things. Researchers and philosophers have defined spirituality as having a strong and coherent belief about higher purpose and meaning in life. Martin Seligman has put this definition forward in the positive psychology movement. It's this search for meaning in our lives through something that's larger than ourselves. And many of you maybe have read the work of Sonia Lubomirsky, another positive psychology researcher who's defined spirituality in this way, this search for meaning, and something more than ourselves. And then Dennis Salibi, who is I consider the father of the strengths-based approach in health and human services from the social work profession, had these core assertions about spirituality. It incorporates yet transcends the biological, social, psychological, political, and cultural aspects of a person. So it's about that person, but it's bigger than that person. It reflects our struggle to find meaning and purpose beyond our own concerns. And it is the essence that joins us with greater complexity in life, and it inspires reverence. If you look at the etymology of the word spiritual, the term means animating. So think about that, life-giving, animating, or vital principle in people and animals. And it derives from the Old French esprit or espérer, and it comes from the Latin word spiritus, which means soul, courage, vigor, breath. And it's related to the word spirere, to breathe. So spirituality is an important aspect of the person and the environment in which they live. And it's an area where we as rec therapists can facilitate greater strengths. Linda Heine and I have developed the Flourishing Through Leisure model, an ecological extension of the leisure and well-being model. And in that model, we include the spiritual domain of human functioning. It's one of the 6 domains of how we live our lives. So there's leisure, psychological, emotional, cognitive, physical, social, and of course, spiritual. And so there is a copy of the leisure and well-being model in the handout that we're providing along with this session. But in the model, we talk about how we can, or what spiritual functioning is. It means that you have hope and inspiration. You have a sense of meaning and purpose. You have a sense of connectedness through which you feel a part of something larger than yourself. You feel a kinship to other people, plants, and animals on earth. You have opportunities for reflection and wisdom, self-actualization, joy and positivity, and opportunities to use and exercise your character strengths and virtues. And spiritual strengths can be fostered through authentic and virtuous leisure. So therapeutic rec specialists can use interventions like values clarification or nature experiences, meditation, reminiscence, life review, yoga, journaling, Tai Chi, religious traditions, rituals, and other approaches that we're going to talk about later. And through our work, what we hope is that when somebody experiences spiritual well-being, the outcome of our help with them will be that they would be able to say, I live my life hopefully and in harmony with my values and beliefs. So this would be the desired outcome of our services with participants. A lot of different things can affect a person's level of spiritual well-being. Things like trauma, illness, suffering, loss, a challenged value system, separation from religion or culture, personal or family disaster, changes in our environment, changes in our health, or changes in our self-concept. These are the kinds of things that can cause us to have a variation in our spiritual well-being. And these are some things maybe you might see in people that have unmet needs or feel less stable with their spirituality. Threats to themselves, insecurity, lack of self-esteem, people seeking out spiritual assistance or questioning their existence or meaning in life, depression, doubts, despair, guilt, boredom, and anger. These are all signs that maybe somebody would like some help in achieving a higher level of spiritual well-being. So that's a very basic introduction to spiritual well-being. Cathy's going to dive deeper now and talk about the important role of recreation in spiritual well-being. Oh, Cathy, you're muted.
Thanks for reminding me. I wanted to just, I went into some books that I had to just kind of get some really essential quotes. So pardon me for looking down and letting you hear those. The first is from Jack Shea, and we're noting his books on spirituality and healthcare among the resources that we're using. There he is. Spirituality is a subtle but powerful resource for creating organization and individual responses that better situations. Now, can you immediately, if it's that kind of a medicalized definition of spirituality, that's what he says in his book. And you got to understand, he has to relate it to healthcare, because that's the framework that a lot of people, the functional medical model framework, a lot of people were looking through, the lens they were looking through. And obviously, they've always been closely related, and healthcare does attend to people as they suffer. So that's the link. The link is that suffering is a time of spiritual invitation. I don't think you have to sell that to anybody who's been living in this COVID time. It's really, really essential to see that both are intrinsically woven. So spirituality, as Shea says, in the terms of the medical model, can help us function better in life. But this other thing that is on the screen here, I think, is the real essence of it. By its very nature, healthcare lives at the juncture of human suffering and spiritual search. And so we don't want to separate that for patients and clients that we work with. We don't want to tell them we don't go into that arena. We have to go where people are and then work with them where they are. So for our purposes today, I want to point out how lucky we are, how so fortunate that we are in the field of recreation. And honestly, you just wouldn't believe how much that this word has been battered over the years. So recreation, I just want to point it out, it has everything to do with the essence of well-being, because when we recreate, we recreate the connection with the one constant in all of reality. And this is so key, so listen up on this. And that's our unity of essence. What does that mean? The unity of essence of body and spirit within each individual person, the unity among bodies and spirits, among people, those who love each other, those who live together, share life together, and all of us who are on the human planet, and the unity between bodies and spirits of all of us in the human species with the environment. So it's just a great term. And once I realized it, I never felt at all embarrassed to say that I'm in the field of recreation, and we help people recreate and create their true selves. So have you heard of the Hindu term Namaste? Sometimes you'll see people say Namaste. That means the divine in me recognizes the divine in you, or the essence, the essential true self that I am recognizes the true self that you are. The divine is the eternal common essence that we all share, and it permeates all embodied spirits in the environments in which they dwell. That's why the ecological approach is the right approach. Recreation by its very nature is also paradoxical. It holds physical action and motionless internal action in the same plane. So recreation can be very active, but very meditative and contemplative. It can also raise awareness of the essence connecting my human form, my essence, to activities, to things that we engage in because we choose them. And it obviously connects my essence to your essence, which is why doing social activity is so enjoyable. Recreation has always been an exclusively good term. That's why recreational drug use that's destructive is an oxymoron. So we say that recreation can't, by its very nature, include negative, destructive, or divisive action. And that's important for us to put forth to people as we talk to them about what we do. So congratulations for choosing a field that by its very definition is aimed at the heart of goodness and allows us to tap into everything around us and everything within us. How fortunate we are. And we could go on for a whole conference just on that concept alone. So what is the role of spirituality in well-being and human flourishing? And so let's get to that point right now. The real mistake that's made by many people in our field was to define the field only in light of current forces that were acting on it. And that's a dangerous thing to do, because then you're just turning your field, twisting your field's definition and reputation to try to make it, force it to fit into whatever the trend, the fad, whatever's paying the most for insurance, whatever. What we really ought to do, and anybody who knows me has known I've been saying this for 50 years, we ought to allow the field to be large enough without fear of diluting its meaning or diluting its value, to be large enough to encompass under that big umbrella all kinds of demographics, all kinds of special population groups, ages, gender, all the things that we know today as inclusion. So, but we have to understand where healthcare and spirituality have been in order for us to understand how messed up it got and why we're now coming back to a more balanced definition. So if you took Intro to TR, you probably heard a lecture on this, but where healthcare grew and came from pre-Enlightenment was very convoluted in terms of religiosity under the guise of medicine. And so we prayed things and hoping people would get better, and we used all kinds of tricks and transactional relationship with God in order for people to get better. And I understand that there's no judgment on that. It's just what we did. We were dominated by a lot of rituals and practices, but then the 18th and 19th century so rejected that it went way far the other way, and when it promoted the scientific method and said this area of spirituality isn't part of what we study in human functioning. So it dichotomized the physical and the spiritual. And doctors eventually might refer a patient to a chaplain, but patients weren't actively incorporating their spirituality into their healing process unless they were doing that on their own. And a lot of people let physicians make decisions for them. The physicians, we all know this history, sort of had a godlike reputation among their patients. And a lot of the decision making for people's health was simply passively given over to the physician and the healthcare team, which certainly pumped up their egos, I'm sure. But we began then to go into another bad direction, which was objectifying the people we served. And that was really unfortunate. And I was part of that in the early 70s, sitting in psychiatric hospital meetings, talking about patients just as cases, not as people. Every once in a while, we would bring the patient into his own care planning session, which now, of course, is, we try to do all the time. But in those days, we didn't really feel it was necessary because we knew what was best for them. This pendulum of swinging back probably began in the early 1900s with the work of Carl Jung, who didn't do it easily. He hid his spiritual inclinations because he knew he would be ridiculed by his colleagues. But in the 1920s, 30s, there was a man named Roland Hazard in the 30s who came to see Carl Jung because he was terribly addicted to alcohol. And Jung worked with him for a year and sent him on his way thinking he was good. And poor Roland was hitting the bar on the way to the airport. So his family sent him back to Carl Jung from New York to Europe. And Carl Jung said, "I'm out of ideas. I've got nothing for you that science can offer you." And he said, "I think you're just going to die of alcoholism." But then he said, "But I've heard that there are people who have a spiritual awakening, and that event causes them to have a complete change of heart and a change of thinking. Maybe you can find some of those people." And so Roland Hazard went back to Long Island and he found Bill Wilson, who founded AA. And so we began to see Carl Jung then was brought in peripherally to AA as a kind of a co-founder of the field, even though unintentional, because it was the first time again that we began to recapture the tremendous value of spirituality in recovery. Then over a period of 60 to 70 years between the 40s and the early 2000s, a host of other people came into play. Teilhard de Chardin is one I wanted to point out. He was in the 1930s and 40s, heavily in the 50s too. Then he got whacked by the Catholic Church and put on the blacklist. But he's had a tremendous rediscovery, even by the church. He was a biologist, and he said this. He said, "We're not physical beings having a spiritual experience. Rather, we are spiritual beings having a physical experience." So he was trying to flip on its head the prevailing notion that what we are mainly as biological human beings was physically functioning human beings who physically function in a social setting. And he was trying, Teilhard was trying to bring out that the spiritual didn't go away. It never went away. We just suppressed it with our disinterest in it. But then Buddhism and Taoism and other Hinduism and Islam began to be rediscovered again as having tremendous things to offer the healthcare field. And of course, indigenous peoples pushed back when they weren't included. And eventually the Western notion that we know it all began to be properly balanced by a larger look at what healthcare and healing and recovery are all about. That's when holistic medicine began to be a movement and to bring the spiritual and the physical back together in its proper integrated perspective. And we've been seeing that, you know, with the reemergence of complementary and alternative medicines, plus the use of expressive arts and recreation that help create lifestyle changes that are more sustainable and conducive to healing and the maintenance of good health, as opposed to the little short periods of medical treatment that are getting shorter and shorter, as we all know, that can't really spend the time with people that they need in order to really be transforming in the effect that the treatment has on them. And of late, science is looking at consciousness itself and asking a lot of questions on how is consciousness integrated into physical and spiritual reality. And largely because of advances in physics and neuroscience, we're now asking, holy cow, does consciousness exist outside of the human body? That would blow everybody's head off in medicine for a long period of time. But the neuroscientists are beginning to say, we're going to need to look at this further. There's so much we don't know about the human brain and what the human brain does to interact with things outside of itself. So we're more humble now than we've been in a long time about what we still have to learn. So let me just summarize a few ideas about spirituality and well-being. We have the more humanistic approaches that gradually came into thinking. Then we had more humanistic movements socially. So I want to just name some people, and we'll put this in our notes to you. They're here, right here, but we'll give them to you, who I think would be great, excellent auxiliary reading for all of you all. Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau, of course, as people who looked at the environment in the early years. William James, oh my goodness, I love William James. He said, he's the earliest person I can find saying this, that you can't think your way into a new kind of living. Rather, you have to live your way into a new kind of thinking. Holy Toledo, that could be our motto in therapeutic recreation, because that's what we help people do. Through living, we live their way into a new kind of thinking. Viktor Frankl wrote Man's Search for Meaning and was a psychiatrist in a concentration camp. Phenomenal contributions to being able to control your own inner happiness and your own inner place of peace. Eckhart Tolle, who I listen to all the time, German, who is just terrific on his own personal transformation. You can see all his videos on YouTube. Matthew Fox, another one that got on the bad side of the Catholic Church, for writing that we are originally blessed, not originally sinful, and promoting a more positive view of our spirituality. Richard Rohr, Franciscan, who bases his spirituality on St. Francis of Assisi and the creation spirituality of Matthew Fox. Karen Armstrong, I just want to point out, oh my God, Karen Armstrong, she's such a big thinker. And she is the one behind the compassionate movement, the Charter for Compassion movement. And I hope you'll look her up and read the Charter for Compassion, because what Karen is trying to do is to reframe well-being in terms that are globally embraced by all major world religions, so that we can get off the emphasis on individual religions and renew our interest in spirituality. Martin Seligman was already mentioned by Lynn, positive psychology, Mahali Csikszentmihalyi, the whole flow background, and the teaching of native peoples, which I don't think we know nearly enough about. So we're still looking. But the subtle shift in thinking points to a power of well-being that's hinged on how we process and internalize the experiences of our lives, irrespective of our physical condition. And that was what was so important about the whole disabilities movement. When people said, "See me, not my disability," they were really expressing this idea we're talking about today, that the internal experiences of our lives have the spirit, the human spirit, have such a power to influence the physical that we can't ignore it. We have to really embrace it. And if we're really lucky and we see it ourselves, we capitalize on it in our practice and meet people where they are and give them the pathways that they need to develop the spiritual and transform their own lives. Life is not dualistic, an either or, either spiritual or physical. It's a both and, where the joy of the body and recreation lifts the spirit, and where the heightened spiritual awareness creates well-being in the body. That's why we see, particularly through the wisdom of indigenous peoples, the spiritual presence that surrounds us in the outdoors. And Lynn, of course, knows much more than I do on that. So I want to just say, in our own field, these are the names I put up. Glenn Van Andel, he came to us years ago and said, "I really feel like we need to put spirituality in those domains." And he did it, and he took a lot of flack for it from some people. But Glenn's such a great guy with such a good heart. He's just wonderful. Charlie Sylvester, how ironic, not a religious person, but a humanistic guy who he's just been one of my go-tos my whole career. So supportive of what we do in this idea of the human spirit and keeping the physical and the spiritual linked. Dan Dustin, and of course, in outdoor and stuff that's just great from Utah. Lynn and her work, and her co-writer Linda Heine, and Marcia Carter, who I just love, has always been such a great person in our field. Boone Murray, just Karen Wenzel, oh my goodness, Susie Ross. There's so many more. I could fill a whole page with the people in our own field who get this and are cheerleading you as you read and listen to this presentation. They really want you to embrace this. And John DeGraff, who's been a friend of our field for decades, he did the film Affluenza, and now he did Take Back Your Time and the campaign to get people to have a legally protected vacation. And now John is on another campaign to bring beauty to the forefront, because he thinks maybe it's a concept that can unite us. It's in beauty that we find all. All is the essential element of creativity, and creativity is what engages the human spirit in action. So that's very, very important. Well-being may be supported by objective evidence, but its foundation is deeply, deeply personal. And a decisive edge does go to people who are willing to be transformed. Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. And I think that's a very important thing for us to look at, allowing the people we work with to tell us what they need to face in their own words, so that their patient narrative, their client narrative, their story takes precedence over everything, their goals. And we'll talk about that more later. So I think, oh, there's the quote from James Baldwin that's so good. And we wanted to put John Lewis in here because to me, he lived it. There are so many wonderful examples of people who live this work and who live the spiritual unity with the physical, that we just have to say how important that they are. The medical model. Oh my goodness, we could do a whole conference on what went wrong with the medical model. Let's just not go there. It got pretty ugly even in our own field for a while, in trying to shove our field into a mold of the community model, of the medical model, instead of a community model, instead of some of the other models, the environmental model, ecological model. And that's largely because that's where the money was, and that's where people felt that the status was. And so anybody who ever went to any of my talks all these years knows that if you're in this for your ego and you're in this for your status, you're probably going to have a rough time, because we're never going to hold a high status within the concept that the field of medicine is dominated by functioning and physicality and medication and all that stuff, which are all fine, but they're not fine alone. So if it doesn't resonate with you, or if your ego needs to feel superior to your clients, spirituality probably isn't something you really want to look at. But around 10 years ago, the Mayo Clinic tapped its Director of Research and Practice, Dr. Amit Sood, to bring his program called Attention and Interpretation Therapy to his hospital staff at the Mayo Clinic as a way of helping the staff see a more holistic concept in giving care and receiving care. Another one of my big care receiving, not just caregiving, by starting with themselves and caring for themselves. He has a wonderful workbook that you can order. He did it with his staff at the Mayo Clinic. And I think began to, with a lot of other people, turn this thing around so that people who work in healthcare could acknowledge themselves as spiritually aware, and physicians could acknowledge themselves as more spiritually aware, and nurses and everybody else. The idea was that over time, we would see the sameness of the journey, and patients become our partners on this journey. It's not, oh, here we are up here and here they are down here. And that's a more satisfying way of caring anyway. It's more compassionate and it's more competent, because it uses psychology and philosophy and spirituality to complete our understanding of medicine. And that is really where we want to go with the rest of our talk.
Yeah, so now we'd like to look more in depth at how do we apply this process of to the TR process of helping people have higher levels of spiritual well-being. So we'd like to look at applications to the spiritual domain of human flourishing, basically looking at each phase of the API process and how we can look at that through the lens of spirituality. So the first step in that process is assessment, and I think a preferable way maybe to talk about it is discovery, helping people discover and helping you discover more about the person. And so I feel like in the spiritual domain especially, the best initial approach to discovering a person's aspirations and goals in the spiritual domain of their lives is to sit and have a conversation with them. And so you should sit and develop a set of questions that you could ask a person about their beliefs and their values, their aspirations, and their preferred way to express and explore their own spirituality. So here's some sample interview questions that you might use with a person. What brings you joy? What brings you a sense of peace and a sense of comfort? What inspires you? What gives you a sense of awe? What daily activities do you like to do to feel connected and to give you perspective? What are you grateful for in your life? What gives you meaning and purpose? What things do you do that give you a sense of accomplishment and a rightness with your life? What are your passions? How do you feel when you pursue your passions? How do you like to practice spirituality in your life? How does how you live your life line up with your values and beliefs? What brings you a sense of hope? What helps you feel hopeful about your life? What are your dreams? What are your aspirations? What are they now? What are they going to be a few years from now? And what kind of space helps you practice spirituality? Nature, a quiet meditative space, a place of worship. So these are some sample questions that would help somebody explore the spiritual domain and help you understand that person better and how you might help them. But then also quantitative assessments also have a place, and they might be especially helpful for somebody to sort of gain self-awareness in some aspects of their own spirituality, and also to be used as evaluation tools in evidence-based practice, but help a person see, here's where I was a month ago, here's where I am now. So here's a couple samples of assessments that you could use that focus more on spirituality or the spiritual domain of human flourishing. Assessments that focus on the person themselves, the values and action assessment. It measures character strengths and virtues, and it helps people identify their strengths and their virtues. It's a quantitative questionnaire using a 5-point scale, very much like me to very much unlike me. And it helps them identify their top 5 strengths, which are called signature strengths. And when a person knows their signature strengths, and they can learn to exercise those more regularly in their daily lives, and that will help. That helps people to feel a sense of well-being and helps you live your life in value or in harmony with your values and your beliefs and your strengths. And so the VIA is on the website. We give it in the resource list, the VIA Institute on Character. There's an online version, there's a youth version, adult version. You can compare your results to other norms and means. So that's an excellent assessment tool. The Meaning in Life Questionnaire, the core of spiritual well-being is a sense of meaning and purpose, and a sense of self-worth, and a sense that your life is connected to something bigger than yourself. Now, this questionnaire is short, it's 10 items, and it assesses 2 different aspects of meaning in life: having a presence of meaning in life and searching for meaning in life. And so it asks you how much you feel your life has meaning and purpose that is authentic to you. And it also asks how engaged and motivated you are to find and deepen an understanding of life's meaning for you. So it's short and easy to administer, so it would be a really useful pre and post kind of assessment that you could use to help people kind of gauge their own growth in the spiritual domain. It's available on the University of Pennsylvania website, which we provide a link to in the handout. The promise tools are developed by the NIH, the National Institute of Health, and there's a very large battery of assessment tools. And one scale within that is the Meaning and Purpose scale. And it asks about positive consequences, positive expectancies, pain, general life satisfaction, general self-efficacy, purpose and meaning, and more. And you can search this entire database of assessment tools on the NIH website by what exactly you want to measure. So you can get the very short meaning and purpose scale there. And then not only do we want to help people assess the spirituality about themselves, but in their environment. Remember, we're doing that ecological approach. And so the HOPE questions were developed to be able to see what kind of spiritual support in the environment the person has or needs. And so the HOPE questions look at H is sources of hope, strength, comfort, meaning, peace, love, and connection. O is the role of organized religion for the person. P, personal spirituality and practices, and E, the effects of medical care and end-of-life decisions. So that's a set of interview questions you can use to help a person get clear on what they want around them to nurture and support their spirituality. And then the last one I put in here for fun, because I think joy is a very large part of a person's spiritual well-being. And the Joy Spotters Guide has been developed by Ingrid Vattel-Lee, who we're going to talk about more later in the presentation. And it's like a fun and kind of whimsy assessment that helps people look all around them where they can find joy around them. So we put a copy of the Joy Spotters Guide in the handout, so you can look at that and you can use that. And it really just helps people see, what's around them that brings them joy when they need it most. The next phase of the TR process, planning and spiritual well-being, when you're looking at moving from discovery to designing and dreaming what a person wants in their spirituality, you want to make sure that you're person-centered, that the person is at the center of the planning process. The person is in the driver's seat, and the person's circle of support is included to help them achieve the goals and dreams that they identify. You want to make sure that it's strengths-based, that the focus is on building a person's capabilities, their strengths, their dreams, their goals, and their aspirations. And it's holistic in that it focuses on the whole person, and especially the spiritual aspects of that person. And planning should also be ecological. It should take into consideration the person's environment, their family, their friends, their resources, their spaces, their culture. And we'll talk about more about that in a minute. And it should be collaborative in that you should view yourself as a rec therapist, as the guide on the side. The participant is the sage on the stage. That they're the full and leading partner in a collaborative relationship. So your expertise can strengthen the planning process, but it should not lead the planning process. So when you're planning, it must be done in a spirit of cultural humility. And here's how the National Institutes of Health define cultural humility: a lifelong process of self-reflection and self-critique, whereby the individual not only learns about another's culture, but one starts with an examination of his or her own beliefs and cultural identities. And so approaching a person with cultural humility is probably most important in the realm of spirituality, in the spirituality domain. And so this is a guide to help you with cultural humility. It's called the humble model. Be humble about assumptions you make, understand your own background and culture, motivate yourself to learn more about the other person's background, begin to incorporate this knowledge into your work, consider a lifelong learning pathway, and emphasize respect. And as you're working through the planning process, that negotiation comes from this place of humility when you're working on developing a plan with the person. And then we move to implementation. Cathy, you're muted. There.
I'm on. This is great. And all the slides that Lynn just presented shows you the continuing evolution of the way we perceive ourselves. We were completely out of control in the pre-Enlightenment era in knowing really what to do about a lot of illnesses. And then we shifted sort of all the way to the other side, that only medicine can control how illness is eradicated and treated and all that stuff. And our egos got bigger and bigger. And I love the fact that we put the word humility. We replaced cultural competence with cultural humility, because we trying to come back to the center and recognize the part that the person we serve plays in this process, which we just didn't do. And we're not there yet. I mean, we still don't have input into the care plan notes and progress notes and evaluations by the patient. But I'll bet you one day we're going to get there with that. That wouldn't surprise me. So I wanted to say, how does the therapeutic or the therapy part of what we do in recreation add value? And, we've always had trouble with this, trying to figure out, are we therapeutic or are we therapy? I don't think that conversation is in as sharp a contrast today as it was in the 80s, when insurance reimbursement for what we were doing was playing such a huge role in whether we were hired and paid decently and perceived by others to have something of value to bring to the table. So today, I think what we realize now is that we are a team, and this team, we're transdisciplinary. And what we're gathering around are not the silos of our own disciplines, but we're gathering around the issues that patients tell us are most important to them. So the problem isn't any longer the Parkinson's disease. The problem is the suffering that the patient and the family are having because of what Parkinson's is doing to them in all domains. That's just an example. So when we look at it, we have to look at it as the person's plan. It's not our plan, it's their plan. And API was developed decades ago in the nursing field. And it was a response to nurses being able to be more involved in the process of planning the care, because it had been just physicians before then, and the nurses carried it out, and they had a little cardex and stuff. But they were just the hands that carried out the stuff. They weren't, part of the process of design. That all lay at the feet of the physician. Now we're, thank God, past that, and so API really needs to evolve too, because there's the same initials we've used for decades now. When I first began to criticize the API process, which probably back in 1982 or 3, I felt that the problem with assessment is it didn't allow for the patient's story to be heard, the narrative. And so, as I rewrote API or explained it when I taught it in class, I always told my students, if you don't know the patient's story, then your assessment is just a few pieces of data, but they're incomplete. So I would really tell you that we've got to find better ways, especially for short-term admissions, to get that information, to get that narrative, to hear the story. When I recognize my own status, if I'm the patient, when I recognize my own status as either flourishing or not, then we can give them the tools that they need to assess themselves. So that's why the questions that Lynn is posting are such important questions beyond the physical functioning question and that stuff. Where is the meaning of my recovery and what have you? And then I always said that envisioning, and I love Lynn's term too, dreaming, that's just wonderful. But when we envision rather than set goals, we're looking at a future and where we want to be in the future. Intentionally designing an experience to be more like what I need or want. That was my version of the intervention planning, getting the intervention selected. I never liked the word intervention, but it's a medical term and I understand why it was there. But I think what it is for the client is an experience. It's an experience. And as I said, experiences are how we live our way into a new kind of thinking. So to me, that was really essential. I think the real change that comes in people when they talk about their own healing, whether their illness is removed or not, comes from the heart, the spirit, the soul, and works its way to the head. Because we certainly know how wrong thinking can make us sick. So we have to look at the reversal of that process. And I think the absolutely wonderful thing about therapeutic rec is it offers recreative experiences that with reflection and processing have the power to change the thinking of people in a healthier way. And that's just so essential. Okay, under documentation and evaluation, I want to say that processing or reflecting on the experience is what I call evaluation. Again, I don't like how the word evaluation got twisted into a data-driven thing. I understand why it did, but I think it's got to be larger than that. I'm not saying we don't include information that's purely objective in our evaluation. We certainly can, not a problem. But I think what it has to do is we're bringing mindfulness and awareness on the patient's part to what he or she has gained, so that that person can nurture and claim and advance their state of well-being. Note that I did not include documentation as part of the API process. I understand how it got in there, and I understand why it has to be done. I don't have any problem with that. Now, if the client was documenting this through, say, entrances into the chart on the patient's, in the patient section of the chart, patient feedback section of the chart, which might happen in the future, I might be more open to it then. But that adding documentation in is a fallout from the medical model, and it's the therapist writing. And actually, my daughter was just evaluating all the charts at her hospice yesterday, and she said, "Holy cow! I can't believe all these people are at the same meeting because I'm reading their charting, and you wouldn't know it by the E in their API. They're all seeing something very different from one another." And I thought that was interesting. But hey, let's call a spade a spade. The one that makes the difference is what the client sees. So that's why whatever we do really needs to address their increased awareness, their ability to say what's happening to them. So the person, I really love the use of journaling in this process, because I think it's very important to get people to get what's happening to them outside of themselves. And so writing it down, where do you think you're gaining traction, or notes to self, or any number of sort of tricky ways to do it that allow people to express their move of awareness about their healing and recovery or adjustment. I mean, hospice is where my heart is. So our people aren't getting better physically. So we have to have other benchmarks of internal peace and coming to grips with where they are in their process of decline, what have you. But you know what? If we do this right, again, the umbrella is big enough for all of us to adapt our writing process and planning process, to what it is our patients and clients tell us they need. Lynn.
Cathy, I would just add, I love the idea of journaling and other emerging documentation methods like photo voice, where people who aren't able to write or maybe even verbalize what they're thinking or feeling on their progress can take photos.
Absolutely.
And those can become a documentation of what's important to them. So there's many other ways. Of course, we need to document, because that's part of our standards of practice and the demand of the settings we work in. But I love your message that documentation can be more than just writing down what happened. And so I think that's really important. A really good lens to look at it through. So that's how we envisioned spirituality, looking through the lens of the TR process, which Cathy and I both have kind of reframed to fit more of a strengths approach. But now we wanted to sort of dive into what are some of the interventions and approaches that can help people build spiritual well-being, and not just about themselves, but also in their environments. And so we're going to take a look at ways that people can build internal spiritual strengths through some of our practices or our approaches. And that can be things, internal spiritual strengths are things like expressing gratitude, practicing spirituality, practicing meditation, spending time in nature, clarifying values, clarifying goals and aspirations, and identifying and using our character strengths and virtues. And building external spiritual strengths can be things like building and sustaining cultures of hope and high expectations, identifying environments for nature-based activities, identifying quiet spaces or creating those spaces, enhancing beauty and aesthetics in the environment. I think of the work that John DeGraff is doing. It's critical to our spiritual well-being. Creating joyful environments and prioritizing positivity into our environments. So we're gonna look at, how do we help people build these internal and external spiritual strengths? What are some practices and approaches that we use? So what is our role as a rec therapist in building spirituality? Well, we want to help people build hopefulness, clarify their values, identify their character strengths and virtues, provide gratitude-based activities, nature-based activities, help identify comforting environments, assess past coping abilities, what's worked before, let's do that again, identifying changes to improve their situation and their abilities. So here's some specific examples of approaches or activities that we can use in rec therapy. For example, to help people build hope, we can use a process called PATH, Planning Alternative Tomorrows with Hope. And that particular example is a planning process, but also an envisioning session that includes the person at the center of their circle of support, where they identify with the people who will help them get there, their North Star and the steps and the actions they need to get to that North Star. So it's a very hope-building process that is powerful, because the circle of support the person invites to the session is there to be their coaches, their supports, their cheerleaders, and help them along that path. To help people identify character strengths and virtues, we talked about using the values and action survey, and you can take that survey and then to help people develop a plan on, okay, what can I do to exercise my strength of kindness every day? And you can actually use a concrete plan to put in place to help people exercise their character strengths daily. To help people build gratitude, you can help people develop the habit of journaling and doing a gratitude journal. There's a lot of evidence to show how powerful this is to help people improve their spiritual well-being. And it can be as simple as writing at the end of every day 3 things I'm grateful for. So very simple practices that you can help people build, spirituality in those strengths. Some more specific examples for nature-based activities. In the province of Ontario, the rec therapists collaborated with the Mental Health Association and with parks and conservation organizations, and they developed a program called Mood Walks, where they mapped out and provided tools and went on walks in all of the different parks and natural areas. And it's all on a website, the actual walks, the program manual, the assessment tools they use to help people see how effective doing the mood walk was in helping them to grow and develop. So that's another example of a nature-based activity. And what I loved about that particular program was that it didn't occur in the vacuum of a treatment setting. It was a partnership with the community to make that happen with people, with parks managers, to help people improve their mental health and their spiritual well-being. Awe walks are another proven approach to use to help people increase their spiritual well-being. And I provide a link here, and it's in the resource list. The Greater Good Science Center has developed some awe walk recordings that you can use to help deepen your walks in nature. So I would highly recommend that. And then the other thing that you can do is to help people identify comforting environments. So you might help develop or help them identify places to meditate. Chapel, it might be a snooze zone or a sensory room where it's a place where people can calm and feel a sense of peace, or it might be an outdoor garden space. So those are all some specific examples of ways we can help people build those internal spiritual strengths. Cathy, you're muted.
You'd think I do this every day. This I wouldn't forget. God, I'm telling you. Okay. What I did when Lynn and I designed the talk was I just put down, a list of things that I would want to say. Some of these might be repetitious to Lynn, so please bear with us. But the guided imagery, I'm a big fan of guided imagery. There are so many YouTube 10, 15, 20-minute guided imagery things now for almost every mood you're trying to enhance or every issue you're trying to address. Jason Stevenson is one of my favorite because he combines it with music. But Tara Brock, there's some really great people putting some super stuff out there for guided imagery and relaxation and meditation. I like Eckhart Tolle, but there's just so many Ramdas. There's just a million of them out there, depending on where you're coming from, how you can, what speaks to you. Mindfulness, practicing mindfulness. I came to it through a contemplative seminars and things like that. Contemplation means means with, and temp means the time, means living in the present. It means being completely in the present. And I used to think when I was home with my 5 kids that there was no such thing as contemplation in the midst of all that, but there is, and you just learn how to do it. You have to learn how to tune things out, and now we've got all these extra wonderful things, yoga and Tai Chi and Qigong and all these other things that are just wonderful. Memory and reminiscence were the ones that I sort of fell into in the early 80s, doing legacy building with people. We do this a lot in the doula work that I do with the dying. I think I just think our field is perfect for doing this kind of memory enhancement and reminiscing and helping people to complete their memories more positively and all that stuff. And of course, we do these collaboratively with people in other disciplines, which I think is great. Prayer and all that, wonderful. So, just more and more. We've got great ideas for you, I hope. Go ahead, Lynn.
All right, and now Cathy already mentioned some of these specific examples, like healing activities like Reiki or hand massage or aromatherapy, or movement activities like Tai Chi or yoga. And the one I was going to mention is loving kindness meditation. Yes. It's a form of meditation I think is very easy for people to approach. It's a very accessible form of meditation where a person repeats the mantra, may you be safe, may you be happy, may you be healthy, may you live with ease. And you continue that mantra, and then you add, may my friends be safe, may my family be safe. And you continue to add to the meditation. And Barbara Fredrickson, who's a scientist that you're probably familiar with the broaden and build theory and positive emotion, she's done a lot of really solid research on loving kindness meditation, and the physiological as well as the spiritual outcomes from doing loving kindness meditation are even more than traditional meditation. And so we provide in the resources a website where you can actually, Barbara Fredrickson actually guides you through some of these loving kindness meditations. So that's a really useful practical approach.
If you work with clients who really are steeped in spiritual traditions, the work of Thomas Keating on centering prayer, I really recommend. I'll just give you an example of it. There's a biblical phrase that says, be still and know that I am God. So Keating would have you think about, be still and know that I am God. And then take the ending off, be still and know. And how does that change the way that you receive that? Be still and know. And then if you meditate on that for a while, be still. And then after you meditate on that for a while, be. And you can go to different depths in each one of those sections of that one biblical phrase. And he does that with a whole lot of passages from Christian and Hebrew scriptures. And I'm sure it can be done with the Quran too. So, and the Tao Te Ching, anything you want. But it's the idea of starting with a larger phrase and then gradually going down to the essential word. Scrapbooking and journaling, there's a lot of great stuff written on that, and we can talk about that a little bit more, or you can, now the hat boxes that are in there came from an activity I did with a 35-year-old woman who was dying of metastatic breast cancer, and we did a hat box with a brass nameplate for each one of her children, and while she was dying, she and her family gathered together and they made cards for her kids for every occasion of their life. And she suggested in the end that she wanted to put a candle in each hat box, so when her children got married, they could light a candle as a symbol of her presence with them still in their later life. Mandalas are wonderful, labyrinth walking. We're borrowing these from medieval concepts of spirituality and Eastern concepts of spirituality. So, again, this is what I love about our field. There isn't any one narrow thing. It's what can you bring? God, I have never gotten tired of our field because what I can bring continually enlarges over the years, and it's just more and more. And then the persons we work with bring it too. So we do it together. I got in this field in 1972, and here it is all these years later. And I'm still as excited as I was then. Excited now for your generation that's bringing it, while I narrow mine down to accompanying people at the end of their life. I just want you to know that we're a community. We're a wonderful community if we allow ourselves to be, and we don't get divisive within ourselves, of people who are wanting to enlarge the experience of healing and recovery to include all the domains.
And
isn't that neat?
Yeah, and Cathy, I think it's interesting you say we have more and more and more and more, and we have such a wealth of approaches that we can use, but interestingly enough, we always need to come back to a core thing we all learn and we use forever in our practice once we're in the field, and that is activity analysis. That you know, any activity-based intervention you do, you want to make sure it fits. You want to maximize it to the best of your abilities for that person to have a successful and therapeutic experience. And so when you do activity analysis, which I know all of us learn this and know this, I want to promote that you also include the spiritual domain. So of course we're going to look at the social aspects, the cognitive, the physical, you know, that psychosocial or affective, but add in the spiritual domain. What opportunities are in this activity for a person to be able to reflect, for a person to be able to use their character strengths and virtues, to have quiet spaces built into the activity, for aesthetic appreciation. So when you do this basic skill as a rec therapist, expand that skill now to include the spiritual aspect as well, and not those traditional domains that we look at, and think about how can I infuse more of these aspects into this activity to help nurture somebody's spiritual well-being. So we included in our handout an activity analysis form that Linda Heine and I have worked on that expands our traditional activity analysis to also include the spiritual domain. The next thing we wanted to look at was how to facilitate external spiritual strength. So how to facilitate those things around the person that can impact and nurture their spiritual well-being. And some of the external spiritual strengths that we'd look for is a culture of hope, support, and encouragement, proximity to nature and to other species, quiet places, places of spiritual nourishment, beauty and aesthetics of joy in the environment, prioritizing positivity, and opportunities for reflection and gratitude. So some specific examples of that, I thought I'd do a couple that maybe are less familiar to rec therapists and are more newly emerging from the research. And the first one is prioritizing positivity. And you can think of that as making it a priority to experience joy in everyday life and looking for and nurturing positive emotions. So deciding what to do at time based on how much positive emotion you'll experience from it. Structuring your environment to maximize positive activities and positive pursuits. And so that might include having favored objects or passion objects on display around you in your face. So for example, if hiking is a passion for you, if hiking is something that gives you meaning and purpose, then have posters and photos of hiking destinations prominently displayed in your environment. Have guidebooks stacked up on your side table or your coffee table. Have maps and bookmarked websites, so when you open up your browser, there's a place where you want to hike next. Have your hiking boots stacked by the door, ready to go, and a backpack ready to go for your hike in the woods. So those are all things that you could do to prioritize positivity in your daily lives. Beauty and aesthetics of joy in the environment. Have you ever spent any length of time in an environment that was devoid of beauty? Think of what it would be like to live in an institutional setting where everything in that setting is designed for function and not for aesthetics or beauty. This kind of living situation can wear down your spirit, and it can create a sense of dreariness and apathy. And in fact, recent neuroscience research has shown that the brain is more active when it's in a pleasing or aesthetic environment. So one of our important tasks as rec therapy in institutional and other settings is to ensure that beauty and grace are a part of that setting. So color, art, furnishings, windows, plants, animals, light, all these things combine to create a livable and nurturing environment versus a deadening and sapping environment. So in institutional settings, assisting participants in creating a milieu that's aesthetically pleasing and joyful and inviting is particularly important to send a message of respect and hope. And leisure activities that are creative and expressive can often enrich environments, whether through the participants' music or artwork or plants or animals. I feel like recreation therapy is in a unique position to facilitate a beautiful, joyful, aesthetic, and spiritual environment. And it would help to build a stronger sense of peace and a stronger sense of spiritual well-being. And that can be, through the beauty, the arts, the decorations, the holiday joy that we bring. And it can be by purposely planning the essential aesthetics of joy into an environment. So I wanted to talk a bit about the aesthetics of joy and how you can build them into environments. And in your handout, there's a guide that Linda Heine and I have put together that sort of shows, here's one of the aesthetics of joy, here's what it could look like, facilitated by a recreation therapist. And the aesthetics of joy were developed by Ingrid Fattel-Lee, who kind of flipped the whole idea that positive emotion comes from us and it's our responsibility and our work to create positive emotions within ourselves. And what she said is, yeah, that's true only to a point. The environment around us can create, ordinary things can create happiness around us too. And so I really loved how she sort of took the blame if I'm feeling sad away from me and said, I could do things around me to make myself more joyful and more positive. And so she, through her research, which is so excellent, and I highly recommend her book, Joyful, she identified these essential aesthetics of joy that you can build into every environment. And so I wanted to just quickly go through them with you so get you thinking about what you could be doing in your settings to infuse some of these aesthetics. And so the first one is energy. Energy is vibrancy of color and light. You could do things like hang sun catcher prisms in sunny windows so it scatters rainbows around the room. Abundance, one is the next aesthetic of joy. A lushness, a multiplicity, a variety. You can create an abundance out of ordinary things. You can collect small children's toys and put them in mason jars or cluster plants together to kind of make a collection of plants that shows sort of an abundance of growth. Gather similar items together so they feel like more than the sum of their parts. Freedom, nature, wildness, open space. So add plants, other nature items to common areas. Hang large posters of scenic national parks. Play nature sounds. Use essential oils to bring the scent of the outdoors in. Harmony, balance, symmetry, flow. You can organize bookshelves by color. You can declutter. You can use mirrors to enhance symmetry. You can coordinate colors to bridge spaces. You can display collections. I love cairns. To me, they're just the symbol of balance. Play, circles, spheres, bubbly forms. So you can pick up a packet of googly eyes, the little googly eyes from the craft store, and let participants put them all over in the common areas, wherever they want to add sort of that fun, bubbly, playful kind of atmosphere. You can, use polka dot fabrics as you decorate common areas. Anything that adds that sort of spherical, circle, bubbly, playful element of joy. Surprise, which is contrast and whimsy. You can add funny character wall murals in the hallway. Tuck bright colors into the bottom of out-of-way spaces, like when somebody opens a drawer, there's a very bright, colorful shelf liner that they are, that they see, or opening up a closet or a cupboard door. You can use quirky decorative objects. I love this, galoshes with the flowers on the picket fence as an example. One of the hospitals, I think it's in Cleveland, their ambulance fleet is all On the inside, they have whimsical characters painted and little monsters peeking out from behind, like playful monsters peeking out from behind the ventilator or that kind of thing. So adding that contrast and whimsy. Transcendence, that is another aesthetic of joy, that idea of elevation and lightness. So paint ceilings and walls in light colors, paint spaces blue, or use gradients to create a sky-like appearance. Hang decorative objects that draw the eye up. Magic, this idea of invisible forces and illusion. You can suspend decorative objects from fishing line to make it look like they're levitating. You can choose paints and fabrics that are iridescent. You can place wind chimes with tinkly sounds in the windows. Anything to give that illusion of magic. Celebration is another aesthetic of joy, this idea of synchrony and sparkle and bursting shapes. So you can add sparkle with metallic accents. You can decorate with bursting shapes, glitter or tinsel. You can use small points of light, like string lights or fairy lights to create a twinkling effect. Renewal, blossoming, expansion, curves. I think this photo captures it so well, where you see this curving path going off into the future through this beautiful blossoming forest. And here you can, place vases of cut flowers in common areas. Choose spiral accents, such as coil pots or braided rugs. Choose art with floral patterns. Decorate for the holidays, decorate for the seasons. So these are some of the examples of the aesthetics of joy that you can build into your rec therapy environments to help to build an external strength of spiritual well-being. You're muted, Cathy.
Very good. We wanted to just stick this little section in again to reinforce the idea of reflection as essential to spiritual growth. We talked about it a little bit in the last few minutes, but we think it's very, very important that we either take time with the people we serve to sit and reflect on the meaning of what they have been experiencing in their programming with us. What we used to do was we just do surveys, did you like this? Did you not like this? Would you do it differently? What else should we have? Or we ask other people in evaluating programs whether we should continue them. But that's not the kind of reflection I'm talking about. I'm talking about what are people gaining? How close are they to envisioning that, what used to be goal in API or plan in API to actually reach what it is that they want to reach. So we're going to just do some practical examples of the field for a little bit, and how we're doing that, and what does that all mean. Lynn asked me to share a little bit about my hospice work. I started doing it in the early 80s, and after what happened with almost losing my own kid, I really felt called to this, and then it just turned out that I had a gift for willingness to be with people at the end of life, which I have done many, many, many times. And it's a beautiful way to apply therapeutic recreation. But I would tell you that every time the people we serve, our patients or clients, whatever we want to call them, work through a phase and leave a phase and move to a next phase, there's a kind of dying. So all the things that I do now, I did years ago in psych, and in physical rehab, and in working with people with intellectual disabilities, because as they move from one phase of life to another, they're leaving a phase behind, they're dying to an old phase and emerging in towards a new phase. It could be a change of living. It could be a change of medical status. It could be a decline or an advancement in understanding and intellectual ability, cognitive ability. So we are we are all in the death and dying business because of that. So even though you may not be working in hospice, I want you to think about how we can do this. When people are dying or they know they're dying, time doesn't mean as much anymore because they don't, they're not looking down the road to long range thing. Time is limited, and at the end of life, it means an awful lot. So spending time with family and friends, people are very open to meaningful activities that enhance the end of life experience. And the doula work that we do really concentrates on doing life review, life interpretation with the people we serve, whether we do it on video or storyboards or all kinds of creative ways to do it, which you all would feel very comfortable with. And then looking at the room where people are going to be when they die and how we can change that. All the things that Lynn just talked about all could work into that space. What a beautiful thing. When my brother was dying, they opened the doors of the hospice and wheeled him right outside onto the patio where he could lie under the stars. Those are all just fantastic ways. There's even a group called Environments in Aging. I've gone to their conference, and they talk about how do we rearrange long-term care and assisted living environments so they're more conducive to meaning and to this movement towards meaning that and change that happen with the aging process. So I just wanted to mention those, and Lynn's got a couple to mention too.
Yeah, I was just going to share one experience that has really stuck with me through the years, because it was such an honor, I think, to be a part of this person's life when they had this sort of spiritual revelation. And this happened when I was working with Wilderness Inquiry, which is a company in Minnesota that leads wilderness-based experiences all over the world, really, with mixed ability groups. And one of the groups that I was leading, one of the participants was an individual who had his life so under control that his whole environment, his job, his work, his life, he didn't need really any help because of his disability. He could navigate, he could control everything. You know, he's this really tight, controlled life. And he wanted to push himself a little, so he signed up for one of the Wilderness Inquiry trips. And he struggled greatly because all that structure he built to make his life so safe and so controlled was gone. And he wasn't a person used to asking for help. He was not used to failing. And when you're out in the wilderness, you don't have pavement and door openers. You know, you're kind of taking wilderness on its own terms. And he struggled getting across the portages and with paddling, and, you know, just was really miserable. And one night we were on this big rock ledge, looking, just all kind of laying out on this rock, looking at the stars, and this big moon rose up over the lake. And it was seriously huge, like this moon, like overwhelmed. It was awe-inspiring. And it was a moment where this participant just kind of hit him. And that's the only way I can say it. He just, all of a sudden he said, you know, I'm sorry, everybody. This whole trip I've been complaining and miserable. And I look at this moon and I realize how insignificant everything is. My life is just a dot in the universe. And all these things I've been stressing about and being miserable over really doesn't matter. And it was just amazing to watch him have the spiritual transformation right in front of all of us. And from that point on, the rest of the trip, he asked for help. You know, we all worked together with him to figure out accommodations and modifications that would help him do better. But it took this moment of him putting it into this large perspective, and it was nature that helped do that for him. It helped have him have that spiritual revelation. So it's always stuck with me because I got to witness it. And it was just an honor to be a part of his life when he had that switch turn on for himself. So that's the story that I wanted to share. I just think it speaks to the power of being in nature to nurture spiritual well-being. So I guess we wanted to end by sharing some resources with you. We'll go through some slides of some different resources, and then everything we're talking about is in the handout with links as well as places you can get these resources, and then a reference list as well. But these are ones we particularly wanted to pull out because they're so excellent. If you haven't checked it out, the Greater Good in Action at Science Center at Berkeley, UC Berkeley, is a treasure trove of approaches and activities that you can use to help nurture not only spiritual well-being, but other domains of well-being. But it's really cool because they have evidence-based practices that it's in a database. And if you're trying to help nurture awe, you can type in awe and these activities will come up that particularly focus on helping people experience awe in their daily life. So that's a really great one. And the other one I talked about, and you have in your handout, the Joy Spotter's Guide is from this website, the Aesthetics of Joy. It's a great website full of ideas on how to infuse environments with joy to help build people's spiritual well-being. So those are two really good ones I would recommend.
Okay, go ahead.
And then I mentioned earlier the loving kindness meditation. This website called Love 2.0 is Dr. Barbara Fredrickson's website, and she has several meditations. You can see a little screenshot of some of them that you can actually use in your practice. You could pull these up and use them during a group with participants, or you can use them for yourself, which is what I do. Cathy, were you going to talk about the mindfulness?
Yeah. Mindfulness for beginners. There's lots of books on mindfulness out there since it's such a great topic right now. So I would tell you that you can get them from lots of sources. Some of them are workbooks like the one I mentioned for the Mayo Clinic. But having these on hand and having them often accessible, and a lot of these people are extremely generous about sharing their resources. So you don't have to worry about the copyright stuff with a lot of these. And I really appreciate that too. These are the two that I had used in this talk. And, you know, they're workbooks. This one on the left is a workbook. So feel free and then share it with the folks you work with, which I think is wonderful. I just want to add one real quick thing that, before I go to this, but keep that slide up. As you look at other kinds of ways of deepening your understanding of some of this stuff, the outdoor stuff, Celtic spirituality is, it's a tradition that goes back prior to St. Patrick. So, I mean, it's spirituality based in creation. And so there's just enormous numbers of poems and songs and resources that you can use for people who really love the outdoors, plus everything that John Muir ever wrote. And, you know, I just can't say enough about it. And on this slide, of course, I just said to Lynn, we have your book is, to me, you're so lucky that you're in the field with access to books like this now. There's so much more advanced and right on than some of the stuff that we've had from the past. I mean, we had the best we could, you know, but it's just getting better and better. Paul Heinzman does a lot of writing on leisure and spirituality, a lot of research, a lot of gathering of resources. He has a book called Leisure and Spirituality, which I put up here. And if you're ever wanting to see the connection between the two, you couldn't do better than with Paul. You may want to say something about these other two, but we just put them on here to give you an idea of what else you can look at that will enhance you. And there's one book that I didn't put on here, but I just used it in a class the other night. Get this is a class at our university taught by a medical doctor who is also an artist. And she brings me in every semester and we talk about spirituality and grief and all kinds of things and art and psychology. And just a wonderful way to enlarge your circle is to find physicians who love art or music, because if you do, you're going to find physicians that get it on the same level that we're trying to promote. So be aware of that.
I just wanted to mention The Art of Recreation Therapy, which is an older book now. It's 2003, but it's beautiful. It's a small book. And Anne Arjay Nathan is the author, and her family members actually gathered this together after she died from cancer and published her work that she had developed through her years as a rec therapist.
Wonderful.
Beautiful book. So I'd highly recommend that one. Yeah, so look at the reference list and the resource list we gave you, and we just pulled out a few to highlight to you. And I was going to say there's a new edition of Linda's and my book coming out in the spring. So
excellent.
Yeah, so we wanted to end we were going to just, I guess, ask each other a few questions and get, kind of dialogue back and forth, since we can't dialogue with you. And so we're going to end by interviewing each other. So I think you're going to ask me first, right?
Yeah, I was going to ask you about the relationship between religion and spirituality, so we don't cross the lines there, or, stray into areas that are too personal for people to share or put people on the spot.
Yeah, and I think it's a question I think a lot of people have in their minds is like, so are you talking about religion? When you hear the word spirituality, and that's what, I think what I would say is we need to help people see that spirituality is, it's complex and multidimensional, and it has like a cognitive aspect and an experiential and a behavior aspect, and all of it is that whole complex, multidimensional part of being human is us searching for and finding meaning and purpose in our lives. And some people do find that connection through religion. So religion is definitely a part of that umbrella of spirituality. And for many people, it is their preferred way to connect with others and search for, something larger than themselves. But not for everybody. And so for some people, they're going to find that connection through nature, or they're going to find it through music or art, or they're going to find it through a set of values and principles that they live their life by. They're going to find it through the quest for scientific truth. So each person has a different way, I think, of achieving spiritual well-being, and it's multi-dimensional. And religion is, for many people, the major way that they would find their pathway to spiritual well-being. Would you add to that, Cathy?
No, I think that's spot on. And start where you are, start where you are, where you're comfortable. If you're more comfortable in general spirituality, great. If you're comfortable in religion, that's great too, as long as you are very, very devoted to making sure you can attend to other people's religious views without imposing your own. That's super
Good
important.
point. So I'll ask you a question. How can we help current practitioners from where you and I are now, later in our careers?
Right. I'm a little further on probably than Lynn even, but here's how I feel about it. And I talked about this even with NCTRC. You have all these people who started in the field with the first certification test in 1990, and we're all aging out now. What a waste of a resource if we're not utilized. And so I would just tell you, reach out. And Lynn and I are willing to do follow-up Zoom calls for any of you who are interested in spirituality. You want to organize something, bring other people in, other colleagues that you work with, or students that you teach. I mean, we're here to share. We have 50 years plus of experience, each one of us, in healthcare, and collectively and across all these settings and what have you. So please feel free to come see us or write to us, and let us guide you and help you with resources that we have, and you can probably help us too by keeping us abreast of what's going on in the field today.
Yeah, I agree. Cathy, what impacts do you feel that COVID has had on the importance of spirituality in our practice in recovery?
Yeah. I'll tell you this, as this pandemic winds down, and all the people who have issues with either how their loved one died or how they are doing with extended suffering that isn't going away, I really hope, and we could be on the really front edge of this, that we begin to offer avenues for people to get together virtually or in person, and process what has happened and process the losses of not being able to be with the ones you love when they die, and do some remedial work on that kind of stuff. We've got a lot of wounds. We have some serious woundedness to address with people who didn't get what they needed at the end of their lives, or their loved ones didn't get what they needed. So, and we've got a lot of medical people who are going to be walking wounded at the end of this. And certainly you could be doing some things for them that would be extremely helpful. So we encourage you to, maybe we should come together as a field and begin to think about ways that we can use what we know to help people cope.
Good. When I think about the dark times we're living through, I think it's almost more like we need joy in our lives now more than we've ever needed it. And so that's one of the things that Ingrid Fattel-Lee she's done a really nice job writing about this, and she calls it recalculating. And she kind of uses the metaphor of, when you get lost and you have your GPS going, and it'll be a nice soft voice saying, recalculating, and not saying, wrong turn, go back. So this is what she has to say, and I really like, so I'm going to read this. But right now, in this crisis, we are all being forced to recalculate. We thought we were headed down one road, and that road is now closed. The very ground on which we've been building our lives is shifting, moment by moment. Many of us are facing very real threats and losses right now to our health, our safety, our security, our livelihood, and our family. Not to mention an uncertainty around our futures and our dreams. It's natural to feel lost in times like this, but we have a choice as to whether we lose ourselves to fear, anger, and despair. Not that we're not going to experience those feelings, we will, of course, but we don't have to remain mired in them. We can stay stuck in rage at being lost, or we can gently recalculate. And recalculating is our best chance at finding our way back towards joy. I love how she states that. And,
absolutely.
And then she gives concrete things you can do, like be gentle, reach out and touch. And she means literally put soft sensory input into your surroundings. So you see that sheepskin there? I actually got one, and I sit in it every day. And it's accept that you're lost. Stop, don't fight it. Just, I'm lost. I'm just going to be lost for a while. Was it the poet that said, live the question? Just experience it. Firm up your foundation. And she says things like organize, clean, play games that give you that sense of going from chaos to order, like jigsaw puzzles or Mandalas or Tetris. In fact, it's almost hard to get jigsaw puzzles now. There's such a run on them. She recommends this app. It's the little icon up in the corner. It's called I Love Hues. And it's an app that you build. You take this kind of chaos of colors and you build it into this beautiful gradient of colors. Just a simple, almost meditative exercise to help you go from chaos to order. Break worry loops. I love this. Worrying is using your imagination to create something you don't want. So break that loop. Go for long walks in nature. Be in nature. Listen to nature. Listen to the birds. Play. Break out the board games. Play pickup games, crafts, just play. These are all things that you can do to bring joy to your daily lives when we most need it. And so I think that's something that we have. It's our duty as rec therapists to do these things with our participants now, because this is when we need it most. So,
absolutely. Yeah. Very good.
All right. Well, that's kind of it. We wanted to leave you with our contact information, and any final thoughts, Cathy?
I just would, don't be shy about reaching out. I remember the very first time I reached out to somebody in our field on a bus, and I was very hesitant to do it. We were on a NRPA thing and going from one location to another. And I got up my nerve and spoke up, and that person became really one of my mentors in the field. And I would tell you, you know, it doesn't matter where you are, what you're doing, if you're a student, if you're a practitioner and you're young, reach out, make friends in the field. We are a small enough field that you can do this easily. And I think we're a friendly enough field that most people would be happy to be your friend. So let people know what you want. Lynn and I and lots of other folks are walking resources for helping you to find other people who can add to your own career path and your journey in learning more about what you can offer to others.
Thank you, Cathy, and thank you for this presentation. We hope you enjoy it, and we hope we hear from you